He came every morning, same table, same order, one egg, black coffee, and a small American flag folded neatly beside his plate. No one knew his name, just that he always faced the window, always sat alone, until the new manager came in, laughed, rolled his eyes, said it was weird, even creepy. Then one day he told him to take the flag off the table. "This isn't a funeral," he smirked. The old man didn't argue, just nodded, and left, quietly. Like silence was something he had practiced more than anyone in that room could understand. The next morning, the flag was gone, but so were the empty chairs, because when breakfast time came, the parking lot filled. Boots hit pavement, uniforms entered, and a battalion and an entire unit sat down one by one, not for food, but for a flag, for a man, for memory. If you believe respect isn't outdated, if you still stand for the quiet ones, subscribe to Endless Stories, where silence marches. And breakfast is sacred. He arrived at 6:47 a.m. every morning. Not 6:45, not 6:50, always 6:47, like some internal clock had been permanently synchronized to something no one else could hear. He didn't speak when he came in, didn't wave, just nodded once to whoever was working the counter, walked to the third booth from the window, and sat on the side facing east. Same table, same seat, same routine. He ordered one egg over easy, one slice of toast dry, black coffee, no sugar. And beside his plate, he laid it down, a small American flag folded in the triangle edges, crisp like it had just been handed from a casket. Nobody asked why, not at first. In towns like this, you learn quickly that some men don't explain themselves, not because they're secretive, but because the truth is heavier than most can hold. The waitresses called him Captain, though no one knew if he'd ever held the rank. It just fit. Like the way he never leaned back in the booth, always sat straight, spine tall, eyes scanning the parking lot like he was still waiting on a convoy. The regulars didn't mind him. Some nodded, some stayed quiet. Most understood, or at least respected what they didn't understand. But then the diner got sold, new ownership, young guy, big ideas, wanted to turn the place around, make it modern, brighter, whatever that meant. New menus, new uniforms, new rules. And on the first day of the soft relaunch, he saw the flag. "What's this?" he asked the waitress. "It's his," she said. "He brings it every day." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because it matters," he scoffed. "Not to the health inspector." That afternoon, he posted a memo. No personal items on tables, no unapproved displays. The staff didn't show him, but word got around. The captain came the next morning, right on time. Saw the sign taped to the front door. Read it, said nothing. Walked in. Took his seat. When the waitress brought his coffee, he placed the flag down like always. She hesitated. Her hand hovered like she wanted to say something. He looked at her just one glance and she backed away. Not in fear, in respect. But the new manager saw it from the counter. Walked over, the smile too wide to be genuine. "Morning, sir," he said, loud and forced. "I'm going to have to ask you to remove that." The captain didn't look up, just sipped his coffee. "Sir," the manager repeated, "the sign says no personal displays on tables. This is a place of business. We're trying to maintain a consistent environment." A pause. Then the captain's voice, low, rough, but clear. "Then be consistent. Start with the wall." The manager blinked. "Excuse me?" The captain motioned with his eyes. A shelf above the register. On it, a ceramic rooster, a tip jar shaped like a boot, and a photo of the manager with a celebrity no one cared about. "You want neutral," the captain said. "Start there." The manager frowned. "Those are decor. Yours is different." "It always is," the captain said, folding his napkin with the same precision as if it were a field dressing. "Especially when people forget what it stands for." "I'm going to have to insist," the manager said, "or I'll have to ask you to leave." The captain looked at the flag, then at the coffee. He nodded once, then stood, picked up the flag, folded it, not fast, not defiant, just deliberate, like he'd done it 1,000 times. Then he set a few dollars on the table, turned and walked out. No goodbyes, no speech, just footsteps, measured, even, quiet. The door swung closed behind him. The waitress watched from the kitchen. The cook stopped mid-order. No one spoke. And the booth didn't feel like a seat anymore. It felt like a hole. That was Tuesday. On Wednesday, the booth was empty. On Thursday, too. By Friday, someone else tried to sit there, but the waitress said it was reserved. For who they asked, you'll know when you see him, she replied. Saturday morning came, 6:47 a.m. The door opened, but it wasn't him. It was a different man, younger, beard, fatigues, followed by 3 more, then 5, then 10, uniform. Not parade, field-worn, boots dusty, faces quiet. They walked in single file, sat down, filled every booth, every stool. And in the third booth from the window, one man laid down a flag, folded, crisp. The manager stepped out, mouth open. The lead soldier looked up. We're here for breakfast, he said. All of us. You? You can't all sit, the manager stammered. You didn't call ahead, neither did he, the soldier replied. But he sat here every day, and now we sit for him. Who told you to come? No one, the soldier said. But some calls don't need to be made. They're just felt. The waitress brought coffee, one by one, then eggs, toast, nothing fancy, no talking, just presence. A room full of men who didn't need to explain why they'd shown up. They just had. And the manager stood still. Because for the first time he realized that flag wasn't decoration. It was invitation. There were 22 soldiers in the diner, every one of them in uniform, not a single one speaking, not out of discomfort but out of purpose. The air buzzed with quiet, thick, and intentional, like the silence itself was part of the ceremony. No one gave orders, no one needed to. They moved with a rhythm only those who've marched together understand. And at the third booth from the window, his booth, they left the seat closest to the wall, empty. Not by accident, not because they ran out of people, but because that was his spot, the captain's. And today it wasn't for anyone else. The waitress placed a cup of black coffee in front of the chair, carefully, like setting a marker at a gravesite. One of the soldiers reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded flag, smaller than standard, edges worn from being carried too long in too many places. He placed it on the table, next to the coffee, the same way the captain used to, with 2 fingers, quiet, measured. The manager watched from behind the counter, palm, sweaty face flushed. He tried to act casual, wiping already clean menus, stacking napkins that didn't need stacking, but his hands betrayed him, shaky, uncertain. Because now he knew this wasn't about policy. It was about presence, about something he couldn't rewrite in a manual or sanitize with a policy memo. The cook leaned out from the kitchen, didn't say anything, just nodded toward the flag. The waitress nodded back, a language of people who understood reverence when they saw it. The soldier who had set the flag down finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like gospel. He came here every day because it was the only place where silence didn't ask questions. Heads bowed slightly, not in shame, in memory. We served with him, another said, not all of us at once, not all in the same war, but in the same cause. The youngest in the group stood next, maybe 25. Still new in the uniform, but with eyes that had already seen too much. He never talked about himself, he said. Only others. Only the ones who didn't come back. He said a man's worth wasn't measured by how loud he spoke, but by how many names he carried without ever needing to say them out loud. The waitress wiped her eyes, quickly, quietly. The soldiers took turns sipping coffee. Some looked out the window. Some closed their eyes. None checked their phones. The manager stepped forward as if to speak, then stopped. Something in him finally understanding that this wasn't his moment, that some rooms weren't meant to be managed, they were meant to be stood in. Witnessed. He turned, walked into his office, closed the door, and for once, didn't say a word. At 7:14 a.m. they stood, not all at once, one by one, like falling into formation. The flag was folded again, returned to the pocket, the coffee left untouched. The chair still empty, and when they walked out, the bell above the door didn't chime. Maybe it was broken, or maybe it just knew better. The veteran had watched the entire thing from across the street, didn't go in, didn't need to. The presence was enough. He closed the notebook, marked the page with a finger, and for the first time didn't feel like the only one carrying the weight, because now that chair wasn't missing. It was reserved. The diner sat quiet the next morning. The usual clatter of dishes and hum of conversation were absent, replaced by a solemn hush. The waitress, Paris, arrived early, her steps echoing in the empty space. She approached the third booth from the window, the captain's booth, and paused. The seat remained empty, the table bare. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small, neatly folded American flag. With reverence, she placed it on the table exactly where the captain used to set his. The gesture was simple, yet it spoke volumes. It was a silent tribute, a recognition of the man who had occupied that space with dignity and purpose. As the morning progressed, patrons trickled in. Regulars noticed the flag and nodded in understanding. No one dared to sit at the booth. It had become hallowed ground, a symbol of respect for the man who had once graced it. The new manager, observing from behind the counter, felt a pang of remorse. The previous day's events had left an indelible mark. He approached Sarah, his voice subdued. I didn't realize, he began, what that flag meant to him, to everyone. Sarah looked up, her eyes steady. It's not just about the flag, it's about what it represents: honor, sacrifice, memory. He nodded, the weight of her words settling in. I want to make it right. She considered for a moment. Then let the booth remain as it is. Let the flag stay. He agreed, and understanding that some traditions are best preserved, days turned into weeks. The flag remained untouched. Patrons continued to respect the space, often leaving notes or small tokens of appreciation. The booth became a living memorial, a testament to the impact of one man's quiet presence. One morning, a young boy entered the diner with his mother. He noticed the flag in the empty booth. Curiosity piqued, he approached Sarah. Why is that seat always empty? He asked. Sarah smiled gently. Because it belonged to someone very special. A man who served his country and reminded us all of the importance of respect and remembrance. The boy nodded solemnly, the gravity of her words sinking in. As time passed, the story of the captain and his flag spread beyond the diner. Local newspapers picked it up, and soon people from neighboring towns visited to see the booth and pay their respects. Veterans left medals, families left photographs, and children left drawings. The diner transformed into more than just a place to eat. It became a sanctuary of stories, a repository of collective memory. One evening, as the sun set, casting golden hues through the windows, a group of veterans entered. They approached the booth, stood in silence, and saluted. One of them placed a letter on the table. Sarah later read it aloud. To the man who reminded us that honor doesn't need words, that presence can be more powerful than speeches, and that a simple flag can unite hearts, we thank you. Tears welled in her eyes as she folded the letter and placed it beside the flag. The booth, once just a seat by the window, had become a beacon, a reminder that even in silence one can inspire change, evoke emotion, and leave an everlasting legacy. It began like any other morning, except this time, the silence came with gravity, the kind that settles into a room before anyone opens their mouth. Before the bell above the door could announce the first customer, Sarah had already placed the folded flag on the third booth from the window. The coffee was fresh, the chair still empty, but something about the air said this morning wouldn't pass like the ones before. At 6:45 a.m., the first man walked in, not a soldier, not in uniform, just a regular mail carrier, early shift. He didn't sit at his usual counter stool. Instead, he walked straight to the booth, placed a small envelope beneath the flag, and nodded to Sarah without a word. By 6:50, two city workers in orange vests arrived. They usually grabbed coffee to go. Today they stood by the window. One took off his cap. The other looked down at his boots. The smell of bacon and toast drifted from the kitchen, but no one spoke. At 6:55, the high school history teacher showed up. She brought her own students, two of them. Quiet kids. They stood just behind her arms, at their sides, eyes locked on the flag like it was more than cloth. Then came the local mechanic, the woman who runs the flower shop, a bus driver, a paramedic, a man who hadn't been seen in that diner for 10 years. And as each one entered, they didn't look for seats. They just stood. By 7:00, every table was full, not with people eating, but with people remembering. Sarah stepped from behind the counter. No tray in hand, just the coffee pot. She topped off the captain's cup first. Still no one sat. Still no one touched the booth. The manager stood in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide, tie loose. He'd seen crowds before, brunch rushes, fundraisers, even a campaign stop once. But this wasn't a crowd. This was a formation, a vigil, a living tribute that didn't need a microphone to be heard. At 7:02, the youngest boy in the room, a kid no older than 10, stepped forward. From his jacket, he pulled out a small wooden figurine, a soldier, hand-carved. He placed it on the table beside the flag. Didn't say a word, just stepped back, head down. The room breathed together, not in rhythm, but in awareness. Everyone now part of the same page in the same story, whether they'd known the captain or not. Then at 7:10, the doors opened again. This time it was her, the woman no one expected. She looked like she'd traveled far, coat, dusty hair, pulled back, eyes tired. But when she saw the flag, she stopped, froze, her hands clenched. Sarah moved first. Are you? The woman nodded slowly. He was my father. Gasps didn't echo. They sunk into the floor like anchors. She approached the booth, looked at the coffee, at the wooden figurine, at the envelope. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. Old, faded, a young soldier holding a newborn. She set it down beside the flag. I never understood why he came here, she said softly. He never said, never explained. I thought he was escaping us, but now I see he wasn't running. He was remembering. A tear rolled down her cheek. No one offered her a tissue. No one interrupted. They just stood with her. I used to be angry, she continued, that he didn't talk, that he wouldn't open up. But now I know this was his way of talking. This table, this flag, this quiet. She looked around. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't shake. He didn't need an audience. He needed witnesses. And in that moment, they all became exactly that. The bell chimed again. A final visitor, the veteran who had been watching from across the street. He entered slowly, walked to the booth, touched the flag, looked at the photo, then nodded. He carried more than most, he said, and dropped less than anyone. He handed Sarah a folded note for the wall. She opened it later, one sentence. He didn't need to be heard, he needed to be remembered. That day, the booth wasn't empty. It was full of silence, of legacy, of people who finally understood what it meant when a man sets a flag beside his breakfast and doesn't say why. And from that day forward, the booth was never touched, not cleaned, not cleared, just left. As it was, waiting. Because some seats are never empty, they're sacred. It started with just one, the youngest soldier from before, the one who had folded the flag with his eyes closed like the motions were built into his muscles. He came back the following Sunday, same time, same uniform. This time he brought a newspaper, not to read but to fold beneath his coffee like the captain used to do. He didn't say a word, didn't even order, just sat across from the booth, the one with the flag, still untouched. Sarah was already ready for him. Coffee black, no cream, no questions. She placed it on the counter near him, and as she walked away, he whispered, "Thank you." That same morning, a couple more came in. Not together, but timed like choreography. Each took a seat around the restaurant, not speaking to each other at first. But when the waitress passed the booth, their eyes followed the flag. One of them stood, walked over, removed his cap, laid it down on the table. A beat passed, then another followed, placed a small patch beside it, unit insignia faded but clean. Then a third came forward, took off his watch, set it face down. We were always waiting on him, he said softly. He was never late, not once. Within an hour, it wasn't just a morning meal anymore. It was a return, a roll call, not for the living, but for the memory they all shared. And by the second Sunday, it had become something else entirely. They stopped calling it Sunday breakfast. They started calling it the watch. Veterans came in waves. Some drove hours, some walked blocks, but they all came in silence. Sat, watched, and stayed for 5 minutes, for an hour, for the time it took to remember. The manager stopped asking questions, stopped printing receipts. He just let it happen. And in doing so, for once, did the most powerful thing a man can do. He stepped aside. The captain's daughter came back too, but this time she didn't bring a photo. She brought his journal, one he'd never let her read. Page after page, she said to Sarah, it was all names, places, descriptions, but never of himself, always of others. They placed it on a shelf above the booth, a simple plaque beneath it for the ones who carried others first. On the third Sunday, something unusual happened. A man who hadn't spoken in public for years walked through the door. He stood tall, pressed shirt, glasses perched low, and in his hand was a cane, not for support, but for memory. He approached the booth, looked at the flag, sat beside it not in the captain's chair, but beside. And he said, "He once saved my son. Gasps weren't needed. No one questioned it." The man continued, 15 years ago, roadside. My boy was trapped, fire growing. Most ran, he didn't. I never got to thank him. Didn't know his name, only his silence. But when I saw that flag in the paper, I knew. He reached into his coat and pulled out a coin, a challenge coin, worn down to the edge. I've been carrying this ever since, waiting for a way to return it. He placed it on the flag. No one breathed. No one moved. And for a moment, that little diner became a memorial louder than any speech, more powerful than any monument. Because now, it wasn't about the man. It was about what he left behind, a seat, a flag, and a reason to return. And every Sunday after that, someone did. The flag had begun to change. Not physically, not in color, but in presence. People stopped seeing it as fabric. They saw it as breath, as weight, as something that expanded whenever someone new stepped through the door. Sarah noticed it first. When she walked past the booth, she swore the light through the window always caught the fold the same way, like the fabric was lit from within. It made her step lighter, her voice softer. Every Sunday more came, some in uniform, some long retired. One woman showed up in nursing scrubs, fresh off a double shift. She sat quietly, took off her name tag and placed it beside the cup. He once stood outside my clinic, she said. Didn't say a word, just stood there while a soldier inside was being told he'd never walk again. And when that soldier looked out the window and saw him, he didn't cry. He nodded and said, "Guess I still got something to live up to." Each new visitor brought something. Not always an object, sometimes just a look, a touch to the edge of the table, a pause beside the window. And then they left, lighter, like a burden had been placed where the flag now sat. The booth never filled. It didn't need to. Its emptiness was the point. The unclaimed space made room for everyone's memories. And over time, it began to gather stories like dust quiet, invisible, but ever present. Sarah started writing them down in a notebook kept beneath the register, every name, every sentence, every item left. One day, a boy no older than 8 slid a crayon drawing under the flag, a picture of a man with a dog tag and a folded triangle on a table. "He looks like my grandpa," the boy said. "I never met him, but I think he would have liked this place." On the 7th Sunday, a group of bikers pulled in. Veterans, vests covered in patches, faces covered in road. They walked in loud boots echoing. But when they reached the booth, the silence fell like command. One of them removed his cap. Another wiped his face. The tallest leaned down, placed a matchbook beside the flag, and whispered, "We lost him in Arizona, but we found him here." The news began to spread. First by word of mouth, then a local reporter did a small piece. Then national news picked it up for a segment called "The Quietest Table in America." The diner never changed, no prices raised, no events held, no signs hung. The only addition was a small frame by the door. Inside it, a single typed sentence. Some chairs are never meant to be filled. On the 10th Sunday, Sarah noticed the flag hadn't faded, not even slightly, despite sunlight, despite time. It was as crisp, as bold as when she first saw it placed there. She asked the veteran who brought it why. He smiled. Because it's not just cloth anymore. It's a promise of what that someone will always remember first, even when others forget. That same day, a soldier who hadn't spoken in months entered, sat across from the booth, said nothing for over an hour, then stood, removed the patch from his shoulder, left it beside the cup. "He covered me with his body when the IED hit," he said. "Didn't even know my name yet." No one asked whose body. They didn't need to. The man walked out without finishing his coffee, and for the rest of that day, the air didn't move like usual. It held still, like breath before a name is said. Sarah opened her notebook that night, flipped through the pages, nearly full now. But she didn't stop. She began a second, this one with no lines, just blank paper, for whoever needed space next. And still the flag didn't fade, because it had become more than a symbol. It had become a place where silence wasn't emptiness. It was meaning. And as long as someone walked through that door, the booth would never be alone. It happened on a Thursday, not a Sunday, not on a day anyone expected. That was what made it matter more. Because memory doesn't follow schedules. Grief doesn't ask for weekends. It just shows up like breath in cold air. The morning crowd had thinned, a few retirees reading papers, a nurse finishing a bagel. Sarah was restocking sugar packets when she saw him. At first, he didn't look like anything special. Mid-60s, plain coat, work boots, ball cap too clean for someone who'd just come from a job. He walked past the counter without a word, straight to the booth. The booth. He didn't sit. Didn't touch the flag. He just stood at attention for 12 seconds, long enough to make the room pause, long enough for people to notice, but not long enough for anyone to speak before he was already halfway out the door again. Sarah caught up with him at the parking lot. "Sir," she called. He turned. His eyes were the kind that didn't blink easily, the kind that once scanned rooftops and never forgot how. "Yes, ma'am. Do you know him?" The man nodded. I knew what he stood for. "You served together." He hesitated, not in uniform, but in life. "I was the one who brought him coffee the day after his son died." Sarah froze. "I wasn't wearing this back then," he said, pointing to his cap. "I hadn't earned it yet. I was just the paper boy." He sat on that porch and didn't move for 3 hours. I walked up, handed him a cup. He didn't say thank you. He said, "I'm not broken. I'm just pausing." The man looked back at the diner. Through the glass, the booth reflected sunlight like it had been waiting for it. "Every time I see that flag," he said, "I pause too." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a dog tag. It wasn't his. It was too old. Edges worn smooth, letters nearly unreadable. "He gave me this when I shipped out," he said. Didn't say why, just pressed it into my palm and nodded. Sarah looked down at it. "You want to leave it?" "No," he said. "I want to carry it one more year." And just like that, he walked off. Not slow, not fast, just precise. She returned to the booth, refilled the coffee, straightened the folded paper someone else had left earlier, a poem scribbled on a napkin. He sat when others fled the room. He stayed when silence felt like doom. And now we stand without a name for he who stayed, we do the same. The rest of the day was quiet, but different. People passed the booth with a nod. One woman, a school teacher, brought her class in. Had them each write a sentence about what respect feels like. One kid wrote, "It's when people don't laugh even though nobody's talking." The flag stayed still, as always. That evening as Sarah closed up, she turned off all the lights except the one above the booth. And as she looked back one last time before locking up, she could have sworn she saw something. A shadow, a figure, not a ghost, not imagination, just a man standing still, one hand raised to his brow, saluting, not to be seen. But because it was time, his name was Paul, most just called him the night guy, the one who showed up when the sun went down and didn't leave until it rose again. No one knew much about him, just that he was there when the locks turned and the lights dimmed, and that every morning the diner looked exactly as it should, clean, quiet, untouched. Especially the booth. Paul wasn't military, not by uniform, not by training. He'd never fired a weapon, never marched. But that didn't mean he didn't understand discipline, or silence, or duty. When the diner first became something more than a place to eat, when the stories started coming in, when the flag stopped being folded and started being watched, Paul took it upon himself to keep the booth safe through the night. It wasn't in the job description, no one asked him to, but something in him knew that flag didn't sleep. Every night before he mopped the floors, Paul would walk to the booth, straighten the flag, refill the cup with fresh water to keep the surface warm, and if no one was watching, he'd sit. Just for a moment, never on the captain's side, always across, like a conversation still in progress. He never spoke out loud. But one night Sarah stayed late and heard him murmur. "You kept your post," he said to the flag, "so now I'll keep mine." Some nights he brought a book, read passages aloud softly. Sometimes history, sometimes poetry. One night he read a letter from his brother written during Desert Storm. The letter had no ending. His brother never made it home. Paul folded that letter and placed it beneath the napkin dispenser, not to display it, just to leave it close. He never told anyone, until the day someone noticed. It was a young woman, first-time customer traveling through. She came in at 6:00 a.m., hours before her shift at the hospital. Saw Paul wiping the edges of the booth with a soft cloth slower than necessary. "You polish it like it's marble," she said. He looked up, smiled. "It is, to some." She sat nearby, ordered toast and tea, didn't say much, but when she left, she placed her hospital ID under the flag. "Emergency wing," Paul read later. "Triage nurse." No note, just the card. The next night, he didn't touch it, just let it stay. The booth had become a beacon, not just on Sundays, not just at sunrise, but in the dark too. One night, a storm knocked out the power. The diner went pitch black. Alarm lights flickered. Refrigerators hummed and died. But the booth stayed lit. Not literally, but Paul lit a candle, one of those short ones people usually place under soup trays. He put it in the center of the table, sat across from it, and kept watch. At 4:27 a.m., lightning struck the pole outside. Windows rattled. The flag didn't move. And Paul whispered, "Still holding, sir." He didn't know why he said it, but it felt right. The next morning, Sarah came in early to help clean up, found the candle burned down to the nub. Paul didn't mention it. She didn't ask. But later that day, someone left a note on the table, "To the one who watches when no one else does, thank you." It wasn't signed, but Paul kept it, folded it neatly, and placed it next to the letter from his brother. The booth never asked for attention, but it received it anyway. Because someone like Paul gave it the only thing most people never knew: it needed consistency. Night after night, shift after shift. He didn't do it for praise. He did it because some flags don't need wind to fly. They need witnesses. His name was Joel, insurance adjuster, divorced twice, no kids, lived 3 blocks from the diner in a 1-bedroom apartment filled with books no one borrowed and medals he'd bought off eBay, not to wear, but to hold, to understand. Joel had never worn a uniform, never stood in formation. The closest he came to combat was watching CNN during Desert Storm while eating microwave lasagna on a fold-out couch. And yet, for reasons he never shared out loud, he stopped by the diner every Tuesday and Thursday morning, always at 7:15, always alone, always sitting at the table directly behind the booth. Not in it, never in it, because some places Joel believed weren't meant to be occupied. They were meant to be protected. At first, people thought he was just another regular, quiet, polite, kept to himself. But then Sarah started noticing something. Every time someone placed an item on the booth, an old medal, a patch, a letter, Joel would return the next day with something small but connected. A laminated card explaining the meaning of that medal, a photo of the unit crest, a short biography of the soldier whose name had been mentioned in passing. He never asked permission, never claimed credit. He simply added context. One day he brought in a folded map and placed it under the edge of the salt shaker. When Sarah unfolded it, she saw it was a section of Vietnam, highlighted with a marker labeled with coordinate states. Beside it, a note: "If anyone wonders where we left them, it was here. June 18th, 1969, 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company." No one had mentioned that platoon, not aloud. And yet 3 days later, a man walked in, paused at the booth, read the map, and quietly began to cry. He left his silver star on the table. Joel sat behind him the whole time, never moved, never introduced himself. That's when people began to ask, who is he? Some thought he was a historian, a reporter, a collector. But Paul the night guy knew better. He's not a veteran, Paul said. He's a student of what Sarah asked, of what we forget to say. Joel continued to come, continued to leave pieces behind. A Morse code printout, a photo of a handshake between a Marine and a villager in Iraq, a receipt from a 1944 diner in France where an entire Allied unit was fed for free. And then one day he didn't show up. Not Tuesday, not Thursday, not the following week. Sarah grew concerned. Paul checked local listings, no obituary, no accident report. But then late one Friday night, an envelope arrived. No return address, just the name of the diner. Inside, a letter written in tight, neat cursive. "To those who kept watch, I wasn't one of you. Not by rank, not by oath. But I listened, I read, I remembered. And in doing so, I found a place among you, if not in uniform, then at least in silence. I never picked up a rifle, but I carried stories. Yours, his, the ones left unsaid. If I'm not at the booth anymore, know this: I am still with you every time you pause before sitting. Every time you fold something with care. Every time you stand when no one else does. That's all I ever wanted, to be a man who knew where to stand. With gratitude, Joel. They framed the letter, hung it just above the booth, not as a claim of ownership, but as proof you don't have to serve to show respect. You don't have to fight to witness the fight in others. You don't have to wear boots to know what it means to walk for someone else. And every Tuesday and Thursday after that, someone somehow still sat in the chair Joel used to occupy. Never replacing, only continuing. Because even those who never served can still salute. The wall above the booth remained blank, always had, no frames, no decorations, while the rest of the diner slowly collected plaques, patches, and pictures from those who came and went. That wall stood untouched like an oath. People offered, of course they did, framed photos of veterans, units, battalions. A young woman once brought in a black and white portrait of her grandfather in uniform framed in dark oak. He would have loved this place, she said. Sarah thanked her, accepted the photo, but never hung it. Another man brought a signed photo of his unit in Afghanistan. It sat behind the counter for 2 weeks before disappearing, gently returned to his hands with a note. This place honors those who stayed quiet. Their memory is the picture. And so the wall stayed bare. Until one morning, a man in a brown postal uniform entered. Middle-aged, wind-burned face, sunglasses tucked into his collar. He held a small package. No return address, no sender. He placed it gently on the counter. Got this in my bag 3 days ago. No tracking, no postmark. Just this diner's name handwritten in perfect cursive. I thought it was a prank. But then I heard about the booth. Sarah opened it. Inside had a photo. Not glossy, not posed, just a snapshot bent at the corners. It was the booth, taken from outside the window. Inside sat the captain, back straight, hands folded, flag beside his coffee. The light hit him just right. His eyes didn't look at the camera. They looked past it. The timestamp on the photo, 6 months before he passed. There was no note, just that photo. Sarah stared at it for a long time. So did Paul. So did everyone who saw it. Someone suggested hanging it above the booth. Finally, they said a face, but Sarah shook her head. No, she said, he didn't sit there to be seen. He sat there so others wouldn't be forgotten. Instead, she placed the photo beneath the glass of the table, carefully, centered, framed by folded napkins and a clean spoon. The wall stayed blank, and somehow, that blank space said more than 1,000 photos ever could, because it reminded everyone, the most important people are often the ones who never asked to be remembered. They just showed up, and in their absence, left something that never really left. He walked past the booth every morning at exactly 7:03 a.m. Never earlier, never later. Same navy blue jacket, same limp in the left knee, same silence. He never looked in, never slowed down. Just passed by the front window, eyes straight ahead, hands in his coat pockets, like he didn't want to disturb anything. Not the dust, not the memory, not even the reflection in the glass. Sarah noticed first. Most people didn't. After all, a man walking by is just that until he's not. But she tracked patterns. It was how she remembered refills without asking orders, without writing them down, faces from 20 years ago, who still tipped the same. This man, he walked like someone with unfinished duty. On the 3rd week, she stepped out as he passed. Coffee, she asked. He paused, startled, not by her, but by being noticed. No, thank you, he said. I'm just passing. You've passed here 21 times. That many, he said, like he hadn't counted, even though he clearly had. I used to know someone who sat in that booth, he added, glancing sideways but never fully turning his head. You served together, she asked. He shook his head. No, he was my brother, and that was all he said. He kept walking. The next morning, the folded flag was gone from the table. Sarah panicked, checked the floor, asked Paul. No one had moved it. But at 7:03, the man walked by again, and this time he was holding it. Not in a display case, just loose in his hand, carried like something alive. He didn't stop, didn't explain. And when Sarah stepped out, he simply nodded. I took it last night, he said. I needed to remember how it felt. She didn't scold him, didn't demand it back. Was he older or younger, she asked. Twin, he said, born 3 minutes apart, died 7 years apart. She stepped aside. Come sit, tell me about him. I've never been inside, he said. That was his place, I stayed out here just in case he came back through the front. He won't, she said gently. But his seat's still waiting. The man didn't answer, just looked through the window again. That afternoon he returned, not at 7:03, but 3:47 p.m. when the light came in sharp and low. He walked in slowly, hands empty. No flag, just breath. And this time he sat not in the captain's seat, but in the one across from it, as if finally accepting a conversation that had waited too long. He never waved, he said, after a moment. Not once. Not when he left. Not when he came home. Just a nod. Just that damn nod. Like words would take too much time and emotions weren't the point. Sarah brought coffee. No cream, no sugar. The same. Did he talk to you? Never about the war, he said. Only about the after. About the emptiness. About how hard it is to fill silence when people stop asking the right questions. And did you ask? He smiled. I asked about his boots, his watch, his dog tags. Never the gun, never the missions. Those weren't mine to carry. He placed a photograph on the table. Two boys, identical, smiling but only one looking directly into the camera. He said the best thing I could do for him was keep living like he wasn't a hero, like he was just my brother again. Do you think you did? She asked. He looked at the photo. No, he said. I think I failed. Because even now all I can do is follow him. Then maybe that's enough, she whispered. Maybe showing up every morning is what he'd have done for you. The man stood, placed the photo next to the cup. Don't hang it, he said. Let it sit here until the sunlight fades it. Let him disappear like the rest naturally. Without ceremony. She nodded. I will. That evening, as the light bled across the booth and the window darkened, the man stood outside at 7:03. This time he faced the window, raised a hand, still, strong, not a wave, a salute, a gesture they'd never shared in life, but one that finally said what no word ever had, I remember. He never intended to return this many times. Not to the booth, not to the town, not to the silence that wrapped around it like an old coat too familiar to throw away. But there was something in the way the door creaked at the same pitch every time he entered, something in the way the light fell across the flag folded on the table, something in the way the coffee never tasted different, no matter who poured it, and he kept coming back. At first it was obligation. Hart had left a name, then another, then a dozen. He had followed each one like stepping stones across a river he didn't know how to cross until suddenly he realized he wasn't crossing anything. He was circling, orbiting, pulled towards something he didn't yet have the words for. Some mornings he sat at the booth across from the flag and just listened. Not to the room, but to what the absence told him. No one ever said the name of the captain out loud, not in full. But everyone knew what he stood for, what his silence demanded of those who now sat near him. One morning, Paul the night, Guy left a note on the counter addressed to no one. The man who keeps coming back should know he's not returning anymore. He's guarding. The note wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. It landed heavy in his chest like the thud of a packed duffel hitting ground after too long on someone's shoulder. That day he stayed longer. He read every note Sarah had collected, every photo, every dog tag, every napkin with a scribbled story. He didn't cry, but his hand didn't stop shaking either. Then without thinking, he walked outside and stood where the captain's brother had once stood on the sidewalk, 7:03 a.m., facing nothing, waiting for no one. And then he did something he hadn't done in years. He took out a pen. He wrote a name, his own, on a folded napkin. First name, last, middle initial, like an enlistment. Then he placed it on the table, not under the cup, beside it. You sat for all of us, he whispered to the empty seat. So now maybe it's time I take your place, not to replace you, but to remind them someone's still listening. He didn't move for several minutes. Then Sarah came over. Are you okay? She asked. He looked up. I think I am. For the first time, I'm not just carrying their names, I'm adding my own. To what? To the watch, she nodded, quietly, walked back. She didn't clear the napkin, she let it stay. The next morning, a woman arrived early. She sat in his usual spot. He didn't mind. Instead, he stood behind her, placed a hand on her shoulder gently and said, Tell me who you're here for. She did. And he listened. Not like someone collecting a story, like someone giving it permission to finally be told. After that, people started seeking him. He became the unnamed chaplain, the unofficial steward of the booth, never speaking for the captain, but always speaking after him to help others hear the echo. Someone once asked, "How long will you stay?" And he replied without hesitation, "Until the flag fades or I do." But the flag never faded. The stories didn't stop. And he kept coming back. Because sometimes the most faithful act a person can perform is to return. Again and again. Not because they must, but because something holy lives in repetition. And he was no longer just the man who followed names. He had become the one who gave them room to sit down and stay. It had always been just a chair. Wood, cushion faded with time, legs that creaked if leaned on too hard. But over time, it became more than a place to sit. It became a place to remember, a place to confess, a place to forgive. No one said it out loud, but everyone who entered the diner and walked past the third booth from the window understood it. That chair wasn't just for someone, it was for something. The kind of thing you carry in your chest but don't know how to put down until you sit across from someone or something that listens. And now it was time, not to replace the captain, not to fill the booth, but to allow the chair to finally say something back. The man who had been returning, the one who carried stories and names and listened, with the weight of a man who had known war without always being at war, came early that morning. Before Sarah, before Paul, before the coffee had even begun to brew. He came with a single purpose, and he didn't tell anyone. He placed a notebook on the table. Not the captain's, not Hart's, his. The cover worn blank. Inside names, sketches, conversations never written elsewhere. He placed it beneath the cup. No note, no signature. Then he turned the chair just slightly toward the door. Not fully, just enough to say, "We're ready. If you need to sit, we'll make space." Then he walked outside, looked at the empty street, felt the wind in his jacket, and knew this was the last time he'd need to return in the same way because something had shifted. The chair wasn't his to protect anymore. It had been seen, witnessed, carried by others. That afternoon, a woman with a camera came in. She didn't take pictures. She just asked if she could sit. Sarah nodded. She sat in the spot across from the flag, opened a notebook of her own and began to draw. Not the booth, not the photo, but a pair of boots, untied, waiting. "My brother never got to take his off," she said, "so I do this for him." That evening, Paul brought the lights down lower than usual, and someone left a folded scarf on the seat. No note, just scent, lavender, maybe memory. The next day, a child came in, sat in silence, then stood and left a crayon behind. Blue, snapped in half, but placed with care like offering. All week, the man who had returned watched from outside. He didn't need to enter anymore. The chair had spoken, not with words, but with what it had become, a mirror for everyone who needed to say something they did not know how to say out loud. And now it echoed, with silence that meant something, with space that wasn't empty, with the message the captain had left behind, though he'd never written it down himself. Sit if you must, stand if you can, but always remember why the chair is still there. The booth was never empty, not really. Even when no one sat in the seat across from the flag, even when the lights dimmed and the coffee cooled and the conversations drifted away to other tables, the booth held something. Not presence, not absence, something in between, something that echoed. The day the man who had carried the stories finally stayed away, Sarah knew before she opened the door. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She just brewed the coffee and placed it on the table beside the flag like she always had. Paul came in late that night, slower than usual, said nothing, just refilled the sugar dispensers and turned the chair slightly back toward the window. Not fully, just a few inches. A new angle, a new chapter. Visitors still came. The rhythm shifted. Some came in pairs. Some brought guitars and played softly in the background. One morning, a young Marine stood beside the booth and read a poem she'd written for a father she never met. Another day, a man knelt beside it, placed his forehead on the table and whispered 4 names. No one asked. No one intruded. Because the booth had become what the man had once been, a guardian. Not of people, of memory. A man from out of state came through. He'd heard about the place from a nephew who saw a clip on TV. He didn't speak English well, but when he saw the flag, he removed his cap, pressed it to his chest, and nodded once like he'd been saluting the same silence in his own country his whole life. That evening, Sarah placed a sign beneath the tabletop, barely visible unless you bent low to read it. The words were simple. You were never forgotten. No quote, no name, just that. Years passed. The edges of the flag began to fray. Someone offered to replace it. Sarah declined. That flag's done more standing than most people ever will, she said. When she retired, she didn't leave a speech, just a key, handed to the new manager with a single sentence, keep the seat clear. They did. One spring, a bus of students visited on a class trip. One boy asked, why doesn't anyone sit there? His teacher answered, because someone already is, and that's how the story kept going, not by adding to it, but by keeping room for it. The chair stayed, the flag stayed, the booth stayed, not to say goodbye, but to say if you're still carrying something, there's a seat for you here, and someone already listening. If you made it this far, you didn't just listen. You stood watch. You carried memory. You honored a chair that never asked to be filled, only respected. Because sometimes the strongest stories aren't shouted, they're whispered across a folded flag and passed down through silence. Subscribe to Endless Stories if you believe that some seats should stay empty so the rest of us never forget who once sat there. This isn't the end, it's a relay, and now it's your turn to carry the story forward.